"She's fine. Just give her the leftovers," her daughter-in-law had said. Lorraine was standing 10 feet away, plate in hand. That night, she rewrote her will. She titled it, "The Leftover Clause." No warnings, no confrontations, just 1% for each of them, served cold, like they did to her. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The early evening light filtered softly through the lace curtains of Lorraine Baxter's dining room, casting a warm, golden hue across the hardwood floor. The table, once the centerpiece of Sunday suppers and holiday feasts, now felt like a stage where the wrong actors were reading from the wrong script. Lorraine sat at the far end of the table, straight-backed in her usual chair, hands folded loosely in her lap. It was the same seat her husband once occupied, the place of honor. But these days, no one noticed those details. Tina floated between chairs like she was hosting a television segment, placing plates in front of her husband and daughter with the kind of flourish reserved for an audience. The aroma of roasted garlic and lemon butter chicken filled the room, but Lorraine couldn't tell whether it made her feel hungry or simply hollow. "There you go," Tina said sweetly as she handed Grace a plate. "Extra asparagus, just how you like it." Grace barely looked up from her phone. "Thanks," she said flatly, then held the plate in one hand and tilted her phone in the other, trying to catch the perfect angle for a photo. The clatter of silverware and soft laughter followed as she snapped a few pictures. "Grandma's used to leftovers," Grace said with a smirk, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "She made a whole career out of them." Lorraine didn't respond, nor did she react outwardly. She simply turned her gaze to the wall, where an old framed photo of her former catering company hung, Lorraine and Mavis in matching aprons, grinning behind a long table of steaming trays and chafing dishes. That life felt like it belonged to someone else now. Eric, sitting at the head of the table as if he'd earned it, chuckled and reached for the wine. "You're still eating for free, aren't you, Ma? Perks of being retired." Lorraine turned her head slowly toward him, then away, resting her hands on the tablecloth without saying a word. Tina finally came around with the last plate, Lorraine's. It was noticeably smaller, with just a few pieces of roasted vegetables, the corner of a chicken thigh, and a spoonful of cold pilaf pressed to one side like an afterthought. "Hope you're not too hungry," Tina said, her voice chipper. "Didn't want to overdo it." Lorraine accepted the plate, still without a word. The fork next to it was mismatched, with a small bend in the tine. She looked at it a moment too long, then set it aside. She stood up, slowly but without hesitation, and carried the plate to the sink. The conversation behind her continued without pause. Grace was laughing at something on her phone. Eric was discussing golf plans. Tina commented on a neighbor's lawn. Lorraine stood at the sink, tipped the contents of the plate into the garbage disposal, and rinsed it under a steady stream of water. Then, with the same unhurried precision, she dried it with a linen towel and placed it back into the rack. When she turned, no one had noticed she'd gotten up, nor that she hadn't touched a bite of her food. She stepped outside through the back door. The screen creaked softly as it opened, then shut behind her. The garden, overgrown in some places but still fragrant with basil and early tomatoes, greeted her like an old friend. A breeze moved through the hydrangeas along the fence line. She inhaled deeply, grounding herself in the quiet. Moments later, there was a familiar rap at the screen. 3 short knocks. Mavis. Lorraine opened the door and her friend stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "Smelled lemon chicken," Mavis said, looking around with narrowed eyes. "Didn't smell gratitude." Lorraine gave a soft chuckle, not of amusement but of weary recognition. "They served me scraps tonight," she said, brushing non-existent crumbs from her palm. "So I think I'll leave them the same someday." Mavis tilted her head, watching her. She didn't ask what Lorraine meant. She didn't need to. Instead, she followed her friend's gaze back to the empty kitchen, to the chairs still occupied by voices that never seemed to pause long enough to listen. Without another word, Lorraine walked over to the drawer by the refrigerator. She pulled out a yellow notepad, the kind she used to make grocery lists and catering schedules on. She set it on the counter, uncapped a pen, and wrote a single word at the top in clean, deliberate handwriting. List. Then she turned the page. The morning after the dinner that wasn't, Lorraine rose earlier than usual. The house was still. Quiet in that way homes get when they're no longer filled with affection. Just footsteps and expectations. She didn't bother turning on the lights. She knew where everything was, she always had. In her housecoat and slippers, she made her way to the kitchen. A faint trail of breadcrumbs dotted the edge of the countertop. Grace must have helped herself to the sourdough during a midnight scroll. Lorraine brushed the crumbs into her palm and let them fall gently into the compost bin. No sigh, no mutter, just motion. She opened the pantry door and stared inside. Rows of neatly labeled jars, most filled with beans, pasta, grains. A few were mismatched or empty, emptied more quickly these days by people who never asked whether they should take, only whether it was convenient to. Lorraine stepped inside the pantry fully and ran her hand across the metal shelves. She traced the worn edge of the wooden baseboard, the one she had sanded herself when Eric was in middle school. That project took 3 weekends, and she'd done it between client orders, cake tastings, and late-night deliveries. She picked up a small legal pad from the counter, the same one where she'd written "List." The first page now had a title she'd inked in the early morning hours, everything they borrowed, broke, or sold. The list began with small things. Silver serving spoon, heirloom, missing since Grace's birthday brunch. Linen tablecloth from Mavis, red wine stain, hidden in garage. Lorraine's Dutch oven, now in Tina's Facebook cooking reel. Front yard rose bush, destroyed by Eric's truck during his quick turn. Her handwriting was neat, steady. It had always been that way, clear, exacting, just like her catering invoices used to be. She moved room by room. The dining room, 2 chairs replaced with folding ones, her good china swapped out with cheap plates. Living room, her late husband's recliner gone, reupholstered and never returned. Upstairs guest room, now Grace's study zone, except for the jewelry box Lorraine hadn't seen since Easter. As she stood at the foot of the staircase, the weight of it all didn't overwhelm her. It clarified her. Every object misplaced, every silence tolerated, every corner of the house quietly colonized. Each told a story, and she was done being a footnote in it. By mid-morning, the sun lit the kitchen in long slants of gold. Lorraine poured herself a single cup of black coffee, no cream, no sugar, and sat at the table alone. She reached for her phone, scrolled, and there it was, Tina's latest post, a bright filtered shot of last night's table. The caption read, "Blessed to care for aging family, gratitude, generational love." Lorraine stared at it. No tags, no mention of the plate she hadn't touched, or the chair she'd left cold, just shiny surfaces and empty virtue. She took a screenshot, then created a new folder in her photo album and titled it simply, "Performative." The silence was broken by the back door creaking open. Mavis stepped in, carrying a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. She paused when she saw Lorraine sitting at the table, her coffee untouched, the list pad open beside her. "Inventory day?" Mavis asked gently, setting the bag down and taking her seat like she'd been expected. Lorraine didn't answer right away. She turned a page in the notepad, then glanced at her phone. "I'm calling Neil this afternoon," she said finally. "It's time." Mavis gave a slight nod, but her eyes searched Lorraine's face. "What's your next move?" she asked. Lorraine didn't miss a beat. She picked up her coffee, lifted it slightly like a toast, and said with a calmness that felt deeper than steel, "Dishes first, then dynasty." The ink was barely dry on Lorraine's list when she walked into Pritchard and Tate Legal Services the following afternoon. She wore her best slacks, not because she had to, but because some appointments deserved dignity. Neil Pritchard stood as she entered, offering a warm smile that didn't need to be practiced. "Lorraine," he said, gesturing toward the leather chair across from his desk, "you look like you mean business today." "I do," she replied, lowering herself gently into the seat. "And not the catering kind." Neil nodded and reached for a blank legal form already set at the edge of the desk. His office smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, the way a room should when it held decisions that couldn't be undone. She handed him 2 sheets from her notepad, the same ones that had kept her up past midnight. The first listed personal items, the second held numbers, percentages. "I want a clause added," she said, her voice steady. "Inheritance should reflect what's actually been earned. I've labeled it proportional inheritance based on verifiable acts of care." Neil adjusted his glasses and read it through once, then again, more slowly. When he looked up, his face held the faintest trace of admiration. "Has a bite to it," he said, "and teeth to hold." "I'm done rewarding presents without substance," Lorraine replied, "especially when it's only for..." Show that night, Tina posted a sun-drenched photo of Grace standing on a rooftop somewhere downtown, holding a coffee cup with both hands like it was a newborn bird. The caption read, "Proud of our Grace starting her influencer internship, Hotcher Next Gen Enter PR Queen." Lorraine saw it between lawnmower passes. The grass was long. No one else had offered. She trimmed each row with the same care she once reserved for wedding buffets. The lines were straight, precise, satisfying. She paused only once, wiping sweat from her brow, when a neighbor jogged by and waved. "Still out here doing it all yourself, huh?" Lorraine nodded and waved back, smiling faintly. "No one else seems to know where the mower's kept." Later that week, she made another call. Not to Neil. This time, to a young woman named Darla Simmons, a former culinary student she'd mentored years ago. Darla was now a professional photographer who specialized in food and storytelling. Lorraine invited her to spend 3 days shadowing her, not to stage anything, but to document it as it was. "You want photos of what exactly?" Darla asked over the phone. "My real life," Lorraine said. "Laundry, errands, cooking for one, things no one claps for but still matter." Darla showed up 2 days later with a modest Canon camera and a quiet kind of respect. She didn't direct Lorraine or ask her to smile. She followed her through the farmer's market, into the kitchen, out to the garden. She captured the lines of her hands slicing beets, the steam rising from homemade soup, the quiet pause at dusk when Lorraine stood barefoot in the grass. Mavis came by on the last day, catching the tail end of a shoot in the backyard as Lorraine clipped lavender from the fence line. "She hiring you for a cookbook?" Mavis asked Darla. "No," Lorraine replied, straightening up. "Just making sure someone remembers the truth of it." Mavis tilted her head, watching Darla snap one last photo, the curve of Lorraine's backlit silhouette against the sunsetting hedge. "So this is the real memoir?" Lorraine didn't reply. She didn't need to. The truth was already framed. Back at the house, as night crept in, Lorraine folded the final copy of her revised will into a slim envelope and placed it in her desk drawer. It was signed, notarized, witnessed. Eric had been reduced to 10%. Grace was gone entirely. The clause was there, clean, sharp, immutable. She stood by the window as the porch light flickered on. Somewhere inside the house, a door opened and closed, probably Grace looking for a snack. Lorraine didn't turn her head. She just watched the light catch in the glass, casting her own reflection back at her like a confirmation. The first clue came tucked inside a stack of mail Lorraine hadn't yet sorted. Most of it was junk, seasonal flyers, charity asks, the usual. But one envelope stood out. It was thin, printed on glossy cardstock and addressed not to Lorraine Baxter, but to Ms. L. Baxter, prospective resident. The return address was a senior living facility 5 miles east, Rolling Pines Memory and Wellness Center. She opened it slowly, careful not to tear the edge. Inside was a brochure with cursive headers, "Your Golden Years," reimagined, and a neatly printed sheet confirming her place on the facility's early admissions waiting list. Lorraine read the paper twice before setting it down beside her coffee. There had been no discussion, no mention, no consent, just a decision made in the silence she had long stopped trying to fill. She didn't storm into the living room or confront anyone over breakfast. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed Neil Pritchard. When he answered, she didn't bother with small talk. "They've put me on a list I didn't ask to be on," she said evenly, "without my knowledge and without my signature." Neil paused, then asked the only question that mattered. Do you want me to respond? I want a formal declaration filed, Lorraine said, her voice calm but cold. All legal and medical decisions go through me, and me alone. No one else speaks for me unless I say so in writing. Consider it done, Neil replied. Later that day, Lorraine changed into her walking shoes and took a bus downtown. She didn't need to go far, just enough to breathe somewhere. No one asked her if she needed help getting up the steps. She spent the next few hours visiting 2 local shelters and a church-run soup kitchen tucked behind a community center. The air inside smelled of tomato broth, powdered detergent, and something else she couldn't name. Something tired. She asked questions no one had time to answer and took notes anyway. A teenage volunteer offered her a styrofoam cup of black coffee, thinking she'd come for a meal. Lorraine accepted it and drank it slowly at a table with a missing leg. By the time she returned home, her cardigan carried a faint scent of cumin and onion. She sat down at her kitchen table and pulled the notepad toward her, flipping past the list of broken things and inheritance numbers. On a fresh page, she wrote a sentence at the top, "Donations in lieu of inheritance." Below it, she began scribbling names: Women's Career Fund, Second Start Culinary Program, Lexington Literacy Collective. All places that did what her family wouldn't, show up for people who didn't have much and didn't ask to be reminded of it. The next morning, Grace approached her in the hallway, tablet in hand and eyes bright with practiced charm. "Grandma," she began, "I was wondering if you'd consider helping me cover a few credits next semester. My grad program just expanded, and the influencer course track opened up." Lorraine didn't flinch. Instead, she walked past her granddaughter, picked up her checkbook from the drawer, and wrote out a single check, neatly, without hesitation. She tore it free and handed it over. Grace looked down at it, blinking. The check wasn't made out to her. It was made out to the Women's Career Fund, with the note, "In honor of Grace Baxter, may someone else earn the chance." Grace opened her mouth to speak, but Lorraine was already walking away. The sound of the printer echoed softly in Neil Pritchard's office, each page emerging with quiet finality. Lorraine sat across from his desk, spine straight, fingers loosely interlaced in her lap. She had worn a charcoal sweater and her good brooch, small, silver, in the shape of a magnolia bloom. It had once belonged to her mother. Neil retrieved the stack from the tray, clipped it together, and handed it to her. "Here it is, final draft, full execution-ready form. The clause is in place exactly as you wrote it." Lorraine adjusted her reading glasses and scanned the pages without rush. Her finger traced the paragraph near the end, its language precise and irrefutable. "To each individual who consistently demonstrated disregard, neglect, or performative care, defined here as minimal interaction, digital performance without action, or verbal dismissal, a symbolic inheritance of 1% shall be distributed. This provision shall be known henceforth as the leftover clause." She read it again, slowly. A warmth spread through her chest. Not joy, not revenge, just clarity. Neil cleared his throat. "It'll hold. I've reviewed it 3 times. It's airtight. If challenged, it'll be upheld as intent, and more importantly, as logic." Lorraine signed the bottom of the final page, the pen gliding smoothly across the paper. "Let them try," she said. "They won't win, because this time I used the same tools they did, just better." The legal office was quiet except for the soft ticking of an antique wall clock. Neil watched her as she placed the pen down with care. "You do understand how symbolic this is," he said. "This isn't just about money." Lorraine gave a slight nod. "No, it's not. It's about measure. They handed me scraps, so I left them precisely that." She left Neil's office with a manila folder clutched against her chest like a fragile but finished recipe. The next stop was Mavis's front porch. The old swing creaked as Lorraine sat beside her friend and handed over a copy. Mavis put on her readers, leaned back, and skimmed through the highlighted clause. By the time she finished, her lips were pressed into something halfway between a grin and a whistle. "Well," she said, tapping the paper, "this is poetic." "It's proportional," Lorraine replied. "Poetry just happens to be part of the math." Mavis leaned over and clinked her lemonade glass against Lorraine's. "To leftovers, then." They sat for a while in shared silence, the kind that held both weight and affection. Cicadas buzzed low from the trees, and a mockingbird practiced other birds' songs in the maple above them. That evening, back at home, Lorraine took out her ivory stationery set from the top drawer, the one she used only for condolences and congratulations. She chose 3 envelopes and laid them out neatly. Each one was addressed by hand: Tina, Eric, Grace. Inside each envelope she placed a personal letter, measured, unembellished, truthful. Grace's envelope was heavier. It included a folded photograph, a printed screenshot of the donation receipt made in her name. At the bottom of Lorraine's handwritten note, a single line was underlined in bold ink: "Earn your own influence." "I've chosen to fund impact instead." She sealed each envelope with wax, an old habit from her catering days, back when presentation still meant something. The letters went into the same folder that now held the notarized will. Upstairs, the light from Grace's bedroom flickered behind her closed door, no doubt glowing with the dim reflection of curated posts and filtered ambition. Lorraine didn't knock. The next morning, as Lorraine brewed her coffee, a notification lit up on her phone. Tina had posted again. A photo of Grace standing next to an ivy-covered campus sign, tossing her hair with one hand, holding a faux diploma with the other. The caption read, "Paving the path for future generations, building real wealth, one strong woman at a time. Legacy makers and generational wealth." Lorraine stared at the screen, her thumb hovering just above the phone. Then she took a screenshot and filed it in the same album as all the others. Performative. She set her phone down, sipped her coffee, and glanced at the neatly sealed folder beside her. Lorraine was halfway through pruning the lavender when her phone buzzed. She didn't rush to check it. These days, urgency was a currency she no longer traded in. It was only after she'd swept the trimmings into the compost and washed her hands that she glanced at the screen. There it was, a new tag from Grace on a social platform Lorraine didn't even use. She clicked through anyway. A video played automatically. It opened with soft piano music and golden hour footage of the Baxter home exterior. Then, shots of Lorraine at the stove, apron tied around her waist, carefully ladling soup into a bowl. A close-up of her hands folding linens. A slow zoom on her profile as she read in her chair by the window. Over the montage, Grace's voice narrated in syrupy tones. "This is my legacy, the strong women I come from, the roots beneath my ambition, 3 generations of grace, resilience, and quiet power." Lorraine watched, silent, as her own image was used to sell something she hadn't consented to, an aesthetic of reverence masking years of disregard. The final frame was Grace's face, full of staged sincerity, with the caption, #LegacyMakers, #my grandmother, my foundation, #family. First Lorraine closed the app, then reopened it. Watched the video again, slower. She opened her laptop and clicked through to the website of the Digital Identity Defense Coalition, a nonprofit Mavis had once mentioned over lunch when a neighbor's grandson used his grandmother's photo for a shoe ad without permission. Within 15 minutes, Lorraine had filled out the necessary takedown form, attached the video link, and cited her state's statute on unauthorized commercial use of digital likeness. She wrote in the comments, "No consent was given. Image and voice were used to create a monetized narrative that does not reflect the subject's lived experience." She clicked Submit. By the following afternoon, the video had vanished from Grace's page. Tina's message arrived not long after. A rushed, breathless paragraph sent via text. "Lorraine, this is spiraling. Grace's internship brand is fragile. She has followers watching. You could have just asked her to remove it. This hurts her future. Please reconsider." Lorraine stared at the message, unmoved. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened her notebook and flipped to the back. On a blank page, she wrote the title, "The Invisible Years." Under it, she outlined 5 talking points: what it feels like to be essential, then ignored; how families curate stories without truth; the economics of gratitude that costs nothing; the theft of elder dignity under the guise of branding; the choice to fund legacy without participating in its fiction. That weekend, Lorraine emailed a finished op-ed to the Lexington Observer, attaching a recent photo Darla had taken, one where Lorraine stood in her garden, sleeves rolled up, hands in the dirt. The subject line was simple: submission, on being seen too late. It was published online 2 days later. By the end of the week, it had over 12,000 local shares. Comments poured in. "This made me call my mother. I feel ashamed and grateful. Thank you. More of this, more honesty." Tina didn't post anything for 3 days. Grace deactivated her comments. Lorraine didn't bother checking in. Mavis arrived one morning with a basket of scones and 2 steaming travel mugs. "Your phone blowing up?" she asked, setting the basket down. Lorraine smirked. "Some people don't recognize a mirror until it speaks." Mavis lifted her cup. "Now that's the kind of leftovers that feed truth." Lorraine clinked her mug softly against her friend's. "No garnish needed." They sat outside as the sun filtered through the porch lattice, casting crisscrossed shadows on the floorboards like invisible fences slowly disappearing. Inside, Lorraine's inbox pinged with a new message. Subject line: "We'd love to syndicate your article for regional reprint." She didn't rush to open it. The envelope arrived on a Thursday, slid under Lorraine's bedroom door with a kind of sheepish ceremony. No knock, no conversation, just the soft scrape of guilt dressed as paperwork. She opened it at her nightstand, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. Inside, printed on thick letterhead with Eric's law firm watermark, was a draft labeled Family Asset Protection and Distribution Understanding. It was peppered with phrases like streamline inheritance, minimize confusion, and mutual familial clarity. Beneath the legal fluff was the intent: sign here, and we all get a cleaner slice of your life. Lorraine folded it once, then again, and slid it back into the envelope. She didn't rip it. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she moved quietly through the house the next morning, stepping into the guest room with a pad of paper and a pencil. The room still bore traces of Grace's stay last summer: a neon ring light in the corner, a pile of unread PR textbooks, a floral throw blanket never once folded. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The dresser held her mother's hand mirror, one of the few heirlooms she hadn't locked away. She made a list of everything in the room: the mirror, 2 embroidered pillowcases from her wedding chest, the teak rocking chair that had once lived in the nursery. By mid-afternoon, she'd packed a box. By evening, she'd made 3 more. The next morning, a driver from the local historical society came to collect her donations. Lorraine handed over receipts and kept copies for her files. When asked if she wanted them displayed under her family's name, she shook her head. "No," she said. "They don't know what these items mean. Let someone who understands carry their stories forward." The next stop was Neil's office again. No folder this time, just a single document to amend. She handed him a printed form and pointed to the section labeled Medical Power of Attorney. "I want it updated," she said, voice calm but resolved. "No family. Not Eric, not Grace, not Tina." Neil raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. He filled out the amendment silently. "Do you want to assign someone else?" he asked. "I already have," Lorraine replied. "Mavis. She has my trust, and more importantly, my sense of humor." They both chuckled softly. It was the kind of laughter that came not from relief but from release. The following day, Lorraine stood in the hallway and looked at the guest room one last time. Empty now, clean, white, impersonal. Like a blank page no one in her family would be allowed to write on again. She picked up the phone and called Sunbeam Cleaning Services. "I'd like a full deep clean. Windows, floors, baseboards, and bring the lavender disinfectant," she added with a smile. "The one that smells like it's trying too hard." The woman on the other end chuckled. "We can do that. First available is Friday morning." Lorraine glanced at the calendar and circled the date. Perfect. When the team arrived, 3 women in matching aprons and bright yellow gloves, Grace passed them in the hallway, earbuds in, half aware, and muttered, "Didn't know we were hosting strangers." Lorraine didn't flinch. "They're not strangers," she said. "They were invited." That evening, she hosted her own dinner. The table was beautifully set, white linen, polished silver, cloth napkins folded in crisp triangles. The dining room was filled with warm conversation, clinking glasses, and easy laughter. There were 7 guests, all seated comfortably: a librarian, a retired nurse, the local mail carrier, 2 former students, a widow from her book club, and Mavis at the head like a quiet sentinel. There were no cameras, no hashtags, no second servings for people who didn't show up the first time. Lorraine raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To real company," she said, "and rooms that remember who opened them." The scent of grilling meat floated lazily through the backyard, mingling with the sharpness of citronella and freshly cut grass. Folding chairs had been scattered unevenly across the lawn like an afterthought, most arranged in a semicircle facing the patio table, which held trays of overdone burgers and grocery store potato salad, still in its plastic tubs. A Bluetooth speaker buzzed faintly with a country playlist someone had queued but hadn't cared to curate. Lorraine arrived on time. She wore a soft blue blouse, linen slacks, and her polished sandals. A wide-brimmed straw hat shaded her eyes, though not her expression. Eric greeted her with a distracted wave from the grill, tongs in hand, beer tucked under his elbow. "There's a seat for you somewhere, Ma," he called without turning fully around. "Think Tina set one up near the garden." Lorraine scanned the yard. The main table was full: Grace, Tina, 2 neighbors, and someone's friend from work. All seated, all chatting. Her seat was indeed near the garden. A folding chair, thin, metal, slightly rusted on one leg, placed just far enough from the table that it would require either an intentional invitation or a loud request to be noticed. No one offered either. She sat. The plate Tina handed her was made of foam and bent slightly under the weight of coleslaw and a grilled chicken leg. No napkin, no drink. Lorraine balanced it on her knees with the practiced hands of someone who had once fed 60 people at a wedding without spilling a drop. The conversation floated around her like smoke. Laughing about weekend plans. Grace detailing her digital rebranding. Tina showing off a new skincare line she claimed to be consulting on. No one asked Lorraine a question. No one paused to listen if she spoke. So she didn't. She ate quietly, slowly. The chicken was dry. As the sun dipped lower, Tina brought out cupcakes with patriotic sprinkles, and Eric raised a bottle in mock toast. Lorraine stood before the dessert tray, made it her way. Grace noticed her rising and turned slightly, her voice raised just enough to be heard. "You didn't even say goodbye, Grandma." Lorraine paused and turned her head, her tone level and unhurried. "I didn't realize anyone said hello." Then she walked toward the gate, never breaking stride. That night, back in her kitchen, Lorraine opened a manila envelope from her desk drawer labeled Emergency Fund. She removed half the contents and slid them into a smaller folder she'd already prepared. On the cover, Bluegrass Culinary Equity Project. The check she wrote was large, larger than she'd ever written before. And it felt right. The next morning, Mavis arrived with a cardboard box under one arm and her hair tied up in a paisley scarf. She didn't ask questions when she saw Lorraine standing at the glass-front china cabinet, hands resting on the edge, eyes fixed on the bone-white dishes passed down through 2 generations. "We boxing it up?" Mavis asked gently. Lorraine nodded. It's time it went to someone who understands the meaning of a seat at the table. Piece by piece, they wrapped the plates and bowls in newspaper, placing them carefully in the box. No tears, just deliberate motion, like packing away illusions. By noon, the cabinet stood empty, the glass shelves wiped clean, the doors slightly ajar. Lorraine stood back and looked at it, not with sadness, but with the detached reverence one gives a room no longer in use. The outburst came in the form of a voicemail, 37 seconds of escalating breath and disbelief. Grace's voice cracked halfway through it. "You donated how much? To some random cooking program, without even asking me? That money was family legacy, Grandma. It was supposed to help us build something. I have tuition. I have a following." Lorraine didn't press replay. She simply deleted the message and placed her phone face down beside a cooling cup of chamomile tea. Tina followed the next morning with a glossy envelope slid under the kitchen door, her new form of diplomacy. Lorraine picked it up between 2 fingers like it might be damp. Inside was an invitation. Please join us this Friday for a special birthday dinner in your honor, homemade meal, just family. The card was printed in soft lavender script and wrapped in tissue paper. At the bottom, Tina had scrawled a handwritten note. Let's reset. Grace wants to apologize. We miss you. Lorraine stared at the word reset for a long moment, then she tucked the card into her recipe box, between the stained pages for lemon meringue and red pepper jam. When Friday arrived, she dressed deliberately. A cream cardigan, dark slacks, soft loafers. She pulled a small insulated cooler from the fridge and zipped it shut. Inside, a portion of roasted root vegetables, rosemary chicken, a plum tartlet wrapped in wax paper. Her own cooking, her own seasoning, her own care. She arrived on time. The table was set with forced effort. Candles, paper napkins shaped like roses, Tina in heels too high for her own comfort. Grace wore a silk blouse and a practiced smile that twitched at the edges. "Grandma," she began with sugary air, "we're just so—" Lorraine held up a single hand. "I brought my own dinner," she said, setting the cooler down. "I've tasted what you serve. I prefer my own recipe." Tina blinked. Grace's mouth opened, then closed. No one reached for her coat. No one took her bag. The moment swelled like a balloon they didn't know how to pop. Lorraine pulled out her container and ate quietly, her silver fork clicking gently against the edge of the plastic lid. The chicken was tender, the tartlet sweet. The room around her buzzed with discomfort and hollow politeness. She didn't stay for cake. On her way out, she passed Grace near the hallway. "You can't just erase us," Grace said, low and sharp. Lorraine didn't pause. "You already did. I'm just finishing the sentence." That evening, Lorraine sat at Neil's office once more. The room was quiet but warm, lit by amber sconces and the low hum of confidence. "The paperwork's ready," Neil said, sliding it across the desk. "Full execution. Every asset redirected. The estate now flows entirely through the programs you listed. Only the leftover clause remains as a technicality." Lorraine nodded once. "Good." She signed slowly, precisely. Her hand didn't shake. As she handed the pen back, Neil leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "You sure you don't want to leave anything for them?" he asked, not with judgment but curiosity. Lorraine tilted her head, her voice as cool as a cellar. "They left me nothing for years. I'm just matching tone." Later, as she returned home, Mavis was waiting on the porch with a bottle of elderflower cordial and a grin already forming. "Well?" she asked, as Lorraine settled beside her. Her Lorraine exhaled deeply. "It's done." Mavis passed her a glass and clinked lightly. "You served it cold," she said. "Just right." They sat in silence as the porch light flickered on above them, and the neighborhood slipped into a hush. Somewhere down the street, a wind chime whispered. The rain had passed by mid-morning, leaving the air clean and the sidewalk dappled with soft reflections. Lorraine sat at the kitchen table, a cedar box open in front of her. Not a jewelry box. This one was wider, heavier. It had belonged to her late husband, once used to hold invoices and contracts for his landscaping business. Now it would hold something different. One by one, she filled it with pieces of her life. Handwritten recipes, the ones never digitized, lemon chicken with capers, apple walnut loaf, the spiced butternut soup she'd made the night her daughter-in-law announced her first pregnancy, back when things still felt hopeful. Next, a small sheaf of letters neatly tied in twine, correspondence between her and Mavis from their early catering days, scribbled ideas and frustrated midnight rants about serving sizes, client tastes, and impossible deadlines. Tucked behind them was a copy of the op-ed she'd written, on being seen too late, folded into thirds but crisp, like it had only been read once. At the bottom, she placed a black and white photograph. Her mother in a flour-dusted apron, laughing with a wooden spoon in one hand, and a newborn Lorraine in the other. No caption. It didn't need one. She closed the lid gently and pressed her palm against the wood. That afternoon, she drove the box to Bluegrass Culinary Institute. A student named Alondra met her at the front desk, clipboard in hand, nervous energy radiating from her like heat. "You're Mrs. Baxter?" Lorraine smiled. "Lorraine, please." Alondra guided her down a tiled hallway toward a sunlit archive room where framed newspaper clippings and alumni photos lined the walls. Lorraine placed the box on a center table like she was planting something. "This doesn't belong in a will," she said. "It belongs somewhere people can use it." Alondra nodded, unsure of what to say. Before leaving, Lorraine signed a small placard for the display. "Recipes for Resilience," donated by Lorraine Baxter, class of 1972. By the time she returned home, her phone was blinking with notifications. Grace had taken to social media with a vengeance. One post read, "When elders weaponize memory to make a point, everyone loses. Legacy should be shared, not locked in vaults. Family is complicated. Truth hurts." Another, "It's amazing how quick some people are to forget who supported them, but sure, rewrite history. That's trendy now." Lorraine didn't engage. She opened the app, clicked through her list of followed accounts, and slowly, methodically, unfollowed each of them. Grace, Tina, Eric, even the family cats account that Tina had once made to seem quirky. She didn't block. She didn't mute. She just closed the door from her side. The next day, Mavis found her at the used car lot off County Road 11, leaning against a cherry-red convertible that looked like it belonged in a 1983 catalog photo. Mavis raised a brow. "Is this a crisis or a celebration?" Lorraine smirked. "A little of both, but it drives clean and the roof folds back like it remembers freedom." The car was paid for in cash. No loan, no cosigner, just her name on the title. The following evening, Tina showed up unannounced. Lorraine saw her through the window, heels wobbling on the cobblestone walk, holding a tote bag with the words, "Let's reconnect," stamped across it in metallic cursive. She rang the bell twice. Lorraine didn't answer. After a moment, Tina stepped back and knocked again, a little louder this time. Still nothing. Lorraine remained seated in her reading chair, sipping a glass of elderflower tonic. She stared straight ahead as the knocking turned to silence. Eventually, she heard the soft retreat of footsteps, the car door closing, the ignition fading down the street. She stood and walked over to the front door, not to open it, but to slide the deadbolt with a quiet click. It started with a folder in the drawer, labeled simply "Next." Lorraine had slipped the paperwork in weeks ago. Real estate contacts, zoning research, handwritten notes clipped together with a paperclip shaped like a key. She hadn't told anyone, not Mavis, not Neil, not even Alondra from the culinary school, who had become something of a curious pen pal in recent days. The decision hadn't come with anger or ceremony, just certainty. She called the agency on a Monday, spoke to a woman named Cherise who didn't ask unnecessary questions, and scheduled a discreet walkthrough for Thursday morning. Lorraine brewed fresh coffee before she arrived and laid out a plate of shortbread cookies, the ones shaped like stars. "No open houses," Lorraine said plainly. "No signs on the lawn until I say so." Cherise nodded. Understood. By the following week, Lorraine had accepted a private offer. The buyer, a local nonprofit that trained young adults aging out of foster care in trades, carpentry, culinary, sewing, light mechanics. They'd been searching for a building with enough rooms to house workshops, offices, and a modest communal kitchen. Lorraine's home, 2-story, sunlit, already loved into every corner, fit perfectly. She read the proposal twice, then signed. No counteroffer, no hesitation, just a quiet, full-circle kind of peace. The first time Eric saw the "for sale," under contract sign, he was stuck behind a landscaping truck 3 houses down. The font was small, unassuming, professional, but it was there, staked in the front yard beneath the hydrangeas Lorraine had pruned every spring without help. He pulled over, hard, tires bumping the curb, and stared. For a long time he didn't even get out, just sat gripping the steering wheel, watching his mother's house transform into something no longer his to assume. His call came in just after 6 that evening. Lorraine didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. Tina followed 2 days later with a message that could barely contain itself inside its paragraph structure. "Lorraine, please, just explain what's happening. This house is our anchor. Grace had plans to shoot her final capstone video here, Rooted Legacy or something. If it's about that dinner or the estate or the press stuff, we can work through it. Please don't do this without closure. We're still your family. Lorraine read it once, then replied with a single text. Leftovers, remember? She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need one. Grace tried something louder. A GoFundMe page appeared late that night, branded in soft pastels with a banner photo of the house in question. The title read, "Help Preserve the Baxter Family Legacy Home." The description was even more dramatic. After a sudden decision that caught us all off guard, our beloved matriarch is handing our generational home to strangers. We believe in restoration, not abandonment. Help us buy it back and keep it in the family, where it belongs. Lorraine found it by accident. A former student had tagged her in a comment with a laughing emoji. The campaign raised $116, most of it from Grace's classmates. It closed quietly 3 days later. That Sunday, Lorraine stood at her front window and watched as a local tradesman in coveralls measured the front steps. Another jotted notes about the porch railings. A woman in her 20s with a clipboard pointed at the side yard and nodded, clearly envisioning something useful in the soil Lorraine had long kept soft. She smiled. Mavis arrived with a thermos of coffee and a brown bag that smelled faintly of molasses cookies. "You finally let them list it, huh?" she asked, sitting beside her on the couch. "No," Lorraine said gently, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. "I finally let someone else love it right." The smell of rosemary focaccia filled Lorraine's new condo by early evening. The space was smaller than her old home, more streamlined, less sentimental, but it felt clean, fresh, like a notebook open to a new page without erasure. The dinner table was borrowed from Mavis until Lorraine found one she liked, but the mismatched chairs gave it character. The walls were already dotted with framed recipe cards and photos from her culinary students, some of them posing with their first knives, others grinning beside sauce-smeared plates. Tonight was a celebration. Not a goodbye, not a reset, just forward motion, poured slowly like good wine. Mavis arrived first, carrying a lemon tart with a slightly cracked crust and zero apologies. "It's not perfect," she said, "but it's real, like the rest of us." Lorraine kissed her cheek and placed it beside the salad, which she'd tossed with hand-cut greens from the community garden across the street. By 7, the condo hummed with soft conversation and bursts of laughter. There was Darnell, who'd won the first scholarship in Lorraine's name, now a sous chef at a local bistro. Serena, who'd once failed a knife skills test twice and now taught high school culinary arts. Alondra came too, wearing a thrifted floral dress and carrying a folded note Lorraine would find later, tucked beneath a dessert fork, scrawled with a simple thank you for making space for people like me. Plates clinked, glasses rose, and steam curled from roasted root vegetables Lorraine had seasoned herself that afternoon. No catering, no staff, just hands and stories. Midway through the meal, someone cleared their throat. It was Miles, one of the older students, tall, soft-spoken, always thoughtful. He stood and held his glass, the room falling quiet without needing to be asked. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice low but firm, "to the woman who taught us to serve something better, not just food but integrity, patience, voice, presence." Chairs shifted slightly as everyone stood with him. Mavis's eyes welled but didn't spill. Lorraine didn't reach for a tissue. She reached for her glass. "To better," she echoed, lifting it, "and to the ones who showed up hungry for more than just praise." The glasses clinked like a soft chorus, and someone, Serena probably, murmured, "Amen." Near the end of the evening, while someone played a few crooked notes on the old upright piano Lorraine had found on Facebook Marketplace, her phone buzzed. She picked it up, glanced at the screen, and quietly turned it face down without breaking stride. It was Grace. The preview text read, "I don't understand why you had to shut us out. Don't you think you've made your point already?" Lorraine didn't respond. She blocked the number. Then, with a steady breath, she walked over to the piano and turned the page of sheet music for the student playing, who looked up with surprise and delight before launching into a simple, sweet rendition of Clair de Lune. As the music drifted through the condo, Neil arrived, late, as always, with a rolled-up parcel under one arm. "I brought a little something," he said, offering it to her. "Framed, as promised." Lorraine unwrapped the brown craft paper carefully, revealing the matte black frame inside. It was her clause, the leftover clause, typeset, signed, stamped. To each individual who treated me as optional. She ran her hand across the glass, slow and deliberate. Thought you might want it hung somewhere, Neil added, or tucked away, your call. Lorraine studied it, then glanced at the empty wall above the piano. There, she said, let it live near the music. Neil smiled. That's poetic. No, she replied. It's proportional. Lorraine found it while reaching for frozen peas. Tucked behind an unopened bag of dinner rolls and a box of microwavable fettuccine, it sat like a forgotten apology. A gallon-sized freezer bag, half squashed, its contents grayish and unidentifiable under a thin sheen of frost. A sticky note pressed to the front read, "For Mom, if she wants it." The handwriting was Tina's. Lorraine stood there for a moment, one hand still resting on the freezer door, the other holding the offending bag. Cold air clung to her wrist like a whisper. She didn't sigh. She didn't grimace. She laughed. It wasn't loud or bitter. It was the kind of laugh that comes when the story finishes writing itself for you, and all you have to do is underline it. By noon, the bag was photographed on her countertop, framed in soft, indirect light. Lorraine printed the photo at the corner pharmacy, chose a matte finish, and slid it into a small gold frame she normally reserved for wedding photos or baby announcements. The next morning, she paired it with 3 identical manila envelopes. Each envelope contained a printed summary of her now final will, signed and notarized weeks prior. There were no attachments, no emotional cushioning, just a bullet-point clarity they couldn't mistake. All assets reassigned, all authority revoked, each party named in the leftover clause to receive 1%, disbursed as labeled. At the bottom of each letter, centered and unbolded, she included the caption from the photograph, "As labeled." The photo itself was tucked inside each envelope, perfectly aligned with the will's first page. Later that afternoon, Lorraine walked to the corner mailbox with her oversized sunglasses on and a cashmere scarf wrapped loose around her neck. She dropped the envelopes in one by one, slow as coins, into a wishing well. Then she walked home through maple-lined streets, stopping to admire a neighbor's rose trellis and letting her fingertips brush the petals like punctuation. When she returned, Mavis was already at the table with 2 lemon bars and a rolled newspaper. "Guess what made the regional alumni newsletter?" Mavis said, waving the paper. But Lorraine was already grinning. "Let me show you something first." She walked to the mantel and returned with the framed photo, handing it to her friend with both hands. Mavis adjusted her glasses, squinted, and blinked. Is that a freezer bag?" "Mm-hmm." "And the note says, 'Oh my Lord.'" Lorraine nodded, calm as rain. "It's the most honest thing Tina's ever left me." Mavis snorted, then cackled, then laughed so hard she had to brace herself against the counter. She wiped at her eyes. "You framed it?" "I framed it. And I mailed it. To all 3 of them." Mavis looked at the picture again, now with something like reverence. "That's the new family portrait." Lorraine poured them both a cup of chamomile, steady hands over antique cups that had once belonged to her grandmother. She set the sugar out, even though Mavis always skipped it. By evening, Lorraine updated her obituary draft. She kept it short. Just the basics. Name, date of birth, education, culinary career highlights. Then, in the final sentence, she added one last line. "Survived betrayal. Passed on better." She saved the file and backed it up to a flash drive labeled simply Finale. Outside, dusk crawled up the windows. Inside, Lorraine stretched her legs, turned the lights down low, and let the silence settle like the last satisfied breath after a full meal. The legal clerk at the courthouse didn't even blink when Lorraine handed her the file. "Adult adoption," she said, offering a thin smile as she reviewed the documents. "We don't see many of these, but we do see the good ones." Lorraine nodded, steady. "This one's a good one." Outside, Alondra waited under the courthouse archway, nervously adjusting the sleeve of her thrifted linen blazer. Her hair was up for once, a small barrette tucked behind her ear, and she clutched a pastry box like a shield. Did it go through? She asked, voice caught between hope and disbelief. Lorraine lifted the stamped copy of the order. Effective today. You're mine now, on paper at least. Alondra opened her mouth but nothing came. Instead, she handed over the box. Inside, 2 eclairs dusted with cocoa and a slip of paper folded like a wish. Lorraine glanced at the note. It read, "Thanks for seeing the best in leftovers." By the time they returned to the condo, Mavis had already rearranged the dining table with her usual flair, napkins tied with kitchen twine, a mason jar of daisies at the center, and a bottle of sparkling juice chilling on ice. "You two missed my speech," she scolded gently. "I was going to say something about stubbornness and legacy and crème brûlée." "You can still say it," Lorraine offered, removing her coat. "Nope, I ate the brûlée and forgot the rest," Mavis said with a wink. After dinner, Lorraine opened her laptop one last time to revise the trust document. Neil had left it editable under one condition, that she not ask his opinion about what came next. She didn't. She typed slowly, carefully, eyes clear and hand unwavering. All residual estate to be directed toward the Lorraine Baxter Mentorship Fund. Trustee, Alondra P. Rivera, legally adopted daughter, symbolic and named heir. There were no carve-outs, no compromises, no footnotes with conditions. Lorraine uploaded the update, encrypted the file, and closed the laptop with finality. That night, a voicemail arrived. It was Grace. Her voice trembled, coiled somewhere between panic and fury. "You ruined us. You really did it. Do you even know what you've done? We're nothing now. We have nothing." Lorraine sat with it for a moment, then deleted the message without replying. But as she stood to wash her teacup, she said aloud, more to the quiet than to herself, "No, Grace, I just stopped funding the ruin." The next morning, Lorraine visited a small jewelry boutique run by a retired silversmith who'd once catered a wedding she'd organized. The store smelled like wood polish and time. She chose 2 bracelets, simple silver cuffs engraved with the word rooted on the inside, one for herself, one for Alondra. The older woman behind the counter wrapped them in velvet pouches. "Mother-daughter gift?" Lorraine smiled softly. "You could say that." Later that week, while planting rosemary in the community garden, Mavis crouched beside her, brushing dirt from her gloves. "You didn't just cut ties," she said. "You built something new, one plate at a time." Lorraine paused, pressing the soil firm around the roots. "I suppose that's all I've ever done. Still," Mavis added, "takes guts to write your own family recipe." Lorraine stood, brushing soil from her knees. "Takes more to cook it without apology." As the sun dipped behind the trellis, Alondra arrived with 2 coffees and the kind of smile you give only when something finally fits. She handed 1 cup to Lorraine, glanced at the soil and asked, "Room for another row?" Lorraine gestured toward the empty bed beside her. "Always." The stage wasn't grand. Just the staff room of the Bluegrass Culinary Institute, dressed up with fairy lights and borrowed linens. The air held a hum of anticipation, soft and kind. Folding chairs had been arranged in clean rows, mismatched but aligned, facing a makeshift podium constructed from 2 butcher blocks and a covered crate of seasonal squash. Lorraine stood behind it now, a small stack of note cards in her hand, though she hadn't looked at them once. Her hair was tucked back in a simple twist, and the engraved bracelet on her wrist glinted faintly under the warm overhead lights. The room quieted as she took a breath. "When I was younger," she began, her voice calm but carrying, "I thought legacy meant leftovers." A few heads tilted in curiosity. "I thought it meant saving the best parts for others, holding back enough of yourself to pass down later, but I've learned something different." She paused, letting her eyes settle gently on the faces before her, former students, donors, kitchen staff, neighbors who'd dropped off zucchini during planting season, people who had shown up not out of obligation, but choice. "Leftovers," she said slowly, "are only for those who leave people behind." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was reverent. "Tonight," she continued, "isn't about what I've saved. It's about what I've served, while it was hot, while it was mine, while it still had flavor." Then she smiled. "Thank you for eating with me." She stepped back. And the room stood. Every chair scraped against the floor in near unison as applause broke out, steady at first, then swelling like rising bread. Mavis wiped a tear with the corner of a cloth napkin. Alondra beamed through her palms, as if holding the moment in place. No media covered the speech, no family lingered at the back. Though Eric had tried. He'd sent a clipped email to the Institute director asking to attend as a witness to growth and gratitude. Tina had drafted a blog post filled with subtle jabs and self-congratulatory nostalgia. How my mother's traditions inspired my wellness journey. Neither received traction. Neither received a seat. Grace, meanwhile, had filed a motion to pause the fund distribution, but it had been thrown out within hours. Her name carried no weight now, only debt. With no trust disbursement, no inheritance, and no sponsor, she packed her things and moved into a shared basement unit in the suburbs. Not Lorraine's suburb, someplace colder, undefended, forgettable. That night, back in her condo, Lorraine returned to the small desk in her bedroom. She opened her final journal, leather-bound, thick with intention, and turned to the back page. Her pen hovered for a moment, then moved without hesitation. Served, sealed, silent. She closed the cover. She walked to the living room where a single candle flickered on the mantel, its scent soft and citrusy, grapefruit and thyme. The piano was quiet tonight. So was the street outside. Alondra had left a bouquet of rosemary on the counter, tied with bakery twine, a note tucked beneath it that simply said, "For everything you seasoned." Lorraine poured herself a glass of elderflower cordial, settled into her favorite chair, and stared out the window as the street lamps hummed on one by one. In her mind, she saw them, Tina, Eric, Grace, circling like old clocks with no hands, ticking in place, hoping to wind themselves back into relevance. But their time had passed. They'd offered her scraps, cold, unlabeled, forgotten scraps, and she had returned them plated, stamped, and documented, so their pettiness would outlive their spin. She took a long sip, exhaled softly, and whispered only to herself, "They served me leftovers, so I gave them a taste of what they offered, almost nothing."